Welcome to Universal Design Learning, everybody. I am Dr. Dorothy Kemp, and I'm actually not going to be presenting in this presentation at all. You will be hearing from some wonderful participants of our CRLA Level 3 program, Mahannah and Chelsey. I'll let them introduce themselves now.
Hi, I'm Mahannah El-Farrah. I am a tutor at LSU in the athletics department. I tutor math. I used to be an instructor in the math department at Western Kentucky University, and I'm working on a Ph.D. in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in math education.
Hi, I'm Chelsey. I'm also a content tutor in the uh, Athletic Center at LSU, and I am working on a PhD in mathematics at LSU.
So these fantastic tutors have been participating this semester in our CRLA Level 3 tutor training program. CRLA stands for College Reading and Learning Association, and what CRLA provides is a framework for programs to develop their tutor training based around their needs. Full disclosure, I am a big proponent of CRLA. I love the framework. I am the past president of CRLA I think I've been off the board for about a year. It's been great being off the board, but it's a pleasure to serve for sure. So if you want to learn more about how CRLA can help your tutor training programs, there's actually a webinar that'll be happening in the next couple of weeks. It's a free webinar. You can kind of see how one particular institution has kind of framed their tutor training around the CRLA training curriculum. We're fortunate enough to be able to offer 3 levels of CRLA, and we've designed this training to really prepare our CRLA Level 3 tutors to go into the workforce, whether that be in our field or a field of their choosing. This presentation in particular is adapted from a presentation that is given to our CRLA Level 2 tutors. So Mahannah and Chelsey were tasked with taking the presentation and adding practical applications of research to learning centers or academics, higher education overall. So with that being said, I will turn the floor over to them for Universal Design Learning.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, so starting off, what is universal design for learning? Also UDL, sometimes I'll say UDL, so if you hear, that's where it's coming from. So just start with everyone's journey in education is different. So here in the United States, education standards vary from state to state. Like every state's different. But even educational experiences within that state can vary. Schools, even within the same system, same county, parish, can produce vastly different results in education. So, I mean, I know that I came from a big school district and my mom was very adamant about which schools I went to. So think about that and then add to that on your educational journey, learning disabilities, emotional challenges, behavioral challenges, reading difficulties, ADHD, language barriers. All of these are just a few things that we encounter whenever we see these students. Chelsey and I encounter this all the time in athletics because we have athletes that come in from everywhere and they are at all different levels and we both are math tutors and just trying to even little things with them, it takes a lot. So, exactly what is UDL? Chelsey, if you'll switch. Okay, so UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, is an educational framework that will help educators create inclusive, flexible learning environments that support all learners, regardless of their background, ability, or learning preferences. And this is important because this is the kind of people that we see. Even in a regular classroom, that's what you see. So not just in athletics. And UDL focuses on reducing learning barriers while maximizing student engagement and success. And the goal here is to design learning environments that will work for everyone instead of retrofitting accommodations after the fact. So we want to make sure that every learning environment is conducive. So that's what we're doing here with UDL. So go on, Chelsey. Okay, so fun on Zoom. All right, so the origins of UDL. So this comes from the universal design, which is a concept from architecture and product design that promotes accessibility for all users. So some examples of a universal design in the real world are ramps. So ramps help people in wheelchairs, but they also help people with strollers or people that like my mom who needs a knee replacement, right? So like that can't do steps very well. Automatic doors are part of a universal design. They're beneficial for people with disabilities, but also anybody that carries a heavy load or anything like that. Closed captions are originally for deaf and hard of hearing of people, but they're useful for language learners and people in noisy spaces. Also, I love to watch TV on closed captioned. I don't know why, but for some reason, I just would much rather read it so that I can kind of like not pay attention, I guess. But so, I love closed captions. I think they're great. So these are all things where the design came from to benefit someone, but then it turns into a benefit for everyone. So UDL applies the same principle to education. And we take that and we ensure that learning materials, teaching methods, and all assessments are accessible and beneficial to every student. Okay. So Oh, hang on, Chelsey. Okay, so the framework was conceived by combining 3 different conceptual shifts, which are advancements in architectural design, as you can see, developments in education technology, and even brain research. So all of that focuses on 3 main principles, as you will see in the next slide, and it's engagement, representation, and action and expression.
Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the 3 principles of UDL, which Mahannah just mentioned: engagement, representation, action, and expression. So starting with engagement, this is the why of learning. The focus of this is how students engage with and stay motivated to learn. The UDL approach with this principle is to provide choices in learning that are relevant to students' interests and varied interactions to sustain that motivation. And the brain connection component is it affects the affective network, or how we process emotions and motivation. So looking at this breakdown here for the multiple means of engagement, the design options for this are really to welcome interests and identities. So this is part of it that we want to get the students interested in what we are talking about. So we want to optimize choices and autonomy, optimize relevance, value, and authenticity, nurture joy and play, and address any biases, threats, or distractions. So we really want to get the students engaged at this point and in something that they're interested in. So if we can connect the concepts that we're either tutoring or teaching, the students are going to be way more engaged and more motivated to learn that topic. Some designs for sustaining that effort or persistence, to clarify the meaning and purpose of goals, to optimize challenges and support, foster collaboration, foster belonging, really just to keep that motivation going throughout the session if you're tutoring or if you're giving a lecture and teaching, just making sure that you're clarifying the goals and making sure that the students understand the meaning behind those goals so they're more motivated to reach that. And then designing for emotional capacity, recognizing expectations, beliefs, and motivations, developing awareness, providing individual and collective reflection. So like Mahannah mentioned earlier, we deal with a bunch of different students from all over the world. And so making sure that we engage with those students in a way that makes sense to them. I know personally I've had students from Italy and other places where we may not understand the same things, but we can come together and find something in that content that she did understand and then connect it to what we're working on now. So that's a big part of the engagement process, is just make sure that you're engaging the students and also providing them with goals and making sure that they're staying motivated throughout the process. Some examples of UDL engagement strategies offer students choices in how they interact with the content. So discussion, hands-on activity, problem solving. I know particularly in math, most of the time they're given a section that they have to review, and it's usually straight from the textbook. And most people that I've dealt with, at least, do not want to read the whole textbook. So finding other methods of that, whether that be through a video, or some hands-on activity that I can come up with, that usually helps students get more engaged with the topic and be more motivated to work through whatever we're working through. Another example, make learning relevant by connecting material to real-world applications. This is a big one in math because we always get asked, why do I need to know this information? So if we can connect it to a real-world application or something that they're interested in, I always try to figure out what their major is to see if I can connect it to something that they know. They're more likely to be engaged with that material. Encourage goal setting and self-reflection to help students track their progress. That's another important one. And then use collaborative and individual learning options to match different preferences. So really just meeting students where they are, making sure that they're engaged by designing things to their preferences or their interest. An example that I came up with for tutoring is a math tutor working with a student on fractions may offer different methods to see what student is interested in so that they can engage with the content in a different way. I came up with fractions because it seems that a lot of students struggle with fractions no matter what math they're taking. So sometimes you can just introduce fractions and start exactly from how they teach it in the classroom and students get it. Sometimes they don't. So finding those other methods, whether that be drawing diagrams to help them understand fractions or finding even a video. I notice a lot of students like to watch videos of examples being worked through, and that really helps them engage with the material. So really the engagement process is just focusing on getting that student to be interested in the material, but also as the tutor or as the teacher to help engage them and keep them engaged throughout the content. I'll pass it back to Mahannah.
Okay, so here we are with the representation. And a lot of these things kind of seem like they overlap, but that's the purpose of them because you want to be able to work across all of these. So representation is important because how can you expect someone to learn if you present material to them in a way that's so unattainable for them that they're just not unable to learn it. So representation, our focus is on how students perceive and process the information. And then the UDL approach for this is to provide content in multiple formats to support diverse learning and preferences and needs. And then the brain connection is to affect the affective network, how we process emotions and motivation. So in order to reduce these barriers, educators need to ensure that information is accessible to every learner. So if you'll go to the next, Chelsey. Okay, so the first design here under representation for the access is perception. And here under perception, we have support opportunities to customize the display of information, support multiple ways to perceive information, and represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic ways. So customizing the display, print is a very fixed thing where digital materials, they're easier to move. You can change the font size, you can do change the volume, you can change the rate of speed. I mean, I zoom in on things on my phone all the time, so customizing the display is a big deal for me. My students like to laugh at me because a lot of times on their graphing calculators, I'm so used to zooming on my phone that I'll do this on their calculator and I can't figure out why it won't zoom, even though they don't do that, because it's just something that we're so used to now. So I've definitely been there with the support in multiple ways to perceive information, offering the same information, but in different ways, not just a text, not just a picture. I've had professors that would literally just read me the book and I can take the book home and read. That was not helpful for me. I needed more than that. And so a lot of people do too. And then representing the diversity and perspectives, like this is a way to give for learners to connect with the material. Chelsey said something about this earlier, especially in math. We see this a lot where people are very, when do I even need this? And people just don't realize how math is connected in the real world. A lot of times in athletics, it's easy because I can kind of compare like, well, think about if you're running a play or think about if you're doing this. But even then, I don't necessarily need to put everything into an athletic frame of mind. So one thing that I did that really stands out was we were doing truth tables and my students were really struggling with conditionals. And I was talked about buying packages online and paying for like expedited shipping, which is something every one of us have done. And so I didn't have to connect it to athletics, but I could make it make sense with something that we all do. So pretty much everybody has a subscription to Amazon somewhere and that 2-day shipping. So for language and symbols, you want to clarify vocabulary, symbols, language structures. That's really important for us because one, we do get a lot of students that not only don't understand these high level terms, but also have a language barrier and you don't want to talk above someone's level. So that's really important You want to support decoding text, mathematical notation, and symbols. Math, we use a lot of symbols, and there's a lot of things that can be confusing, but I like to, whenever I teach, I like to use simpler words, but at the same time, use a more advanced word so that they understand. And I will say, okay, we're going to sum these. What does summing mean? And then they say add. And so they're learning the vocabulary that they will be reading and seeing, but they're also able to connect it to something. And that's extremely important. It's like when you go to the doctor and they're talking in this medical jargon and you can't understand what they're saying, just bring it down to a level that someone can understand and make sure that they're understanding. A lot of times you can see it when people are just nodding in agreement um, in their eyes. So, um, you just want to clarify all of that and make sure they're understanding, address any bias in the language and the symbols, illustrate through multiple media. That's such a huge point. There's more than one direction to get to different places. So then building knowledge, you always want to connect your prior knowledge to new learning. I love doing this. It helps bridge concepts, and you can also bridge concepts into later things into other subjects. You talk about patterns, see what they recognize. Also, let students explore their ideas. Letting someone explore is really helpful in letting them learn, because whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Like, it's more of a like, okay, this is where I'm thinking, and we can like build a path on that, and we can correct the path if it's wrong. One of the things that I like to talk about with my students, there are multiple ways, especially in math, there's multiple ways to get places and to get correct answers. You don't have to, there's not just one way. And one of my students recently was saying, well, my teacher did it this way and you're doing it this way, and I don't know which one. And he was confusing both of them. And my explanation to that was, I said, tell me how you get home from here. And he said, what do you mean? I said, tell me how to get to your house from here, from where we're standing in this building. And so he told me, and I said, okay, what if the road is closed because a parade is coming? Because, in Louisiana, there's always a parade for something. And he was like, oh, well, then I just go this way. And I said, so is that wrong because you went a different way? And he said, no. And I said, that's how math works. Just because you go a different direction does not mean that everything is incorrect. And we need to keep our minds open that just because our path is one path does not mean it's the best path for someone else. And that's what's great about UDL, is it helps show that. Chelsey, if you'll go to the next slide. So a tutoring example that I came up with, actually, this is one that I used very recently. One of my students was struggling. So a tutor uses multiple methods to convey a concept so they can see different representations of the same problems. We've been doing a lot of probability lately with my students, and one of the biggest issues that we've been running into is a lot of them don't know how to play cards. Growing up, we played a lot of cards. Actually, my mom didn't want me to play cards because she said it would lead to gambling, and I like to gamble, but it is what it is. But so my students, though, they don't ever play cards. And so I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what a deck of cards looks like? So whenever we teach probability, I always give this handout that has a deck of cards on it, and you can look at it, you can see it. And I will see them like going, okay, this is this many jacks, this is this many whatevers, and they still struggle. So one day I was like, fine. And I brought a deck of cards in and I set it in front of one of my students and I said, sort it out for me. I said, put them in order. I said, start with the A's, go to 10, then Jack, Queen, King. And once he did that, he could tell you exactly what was in a deck of cards. He could look at the picture all day long, but physically having it in his hand and just sorting it one time and putting all the cards in order and seeing the different suits and seeing the different cards was enough to make it stick. And sometimes we just need that, something that is so simple that is, I mean, I can look at a picture, but I know a deck of cards. And so something that easy was just a tiny little transition, but now they get it. That having it in their hand physically was something that helped get it. And that's what the representation means with this. Okay, Chelsey.
Perfect. So the last principle of UDL is action and expression, or the how of learning. So the focus here is how students demonstrate their understanding. So this is really going to focus on, a lot of the times in math, when you ask, oh, did you understand this concept? You get a yes automatically, but that doesn't really have the students show that they understand what you're talking about. So this really focuses on the student kind of being in the tutor position and showing that they can do this material without the help of a tutor or outside of the classroom. So the UDL approach, it allows for flexibility in how students complete tasks and assessments. So what Mahannah said was perfect. In math, there's multiple different ways to get to the right answers. And I've had the same thing where students come in and they're like, well, my professor does it this way, I have to do it this way. And that's not necessarily the case. So that flexibility in the UDL approach really allows students to understand the material, but to do it in their own way and connect it to how they understand it. The brain connection of this principle affects the strategic network, how we plan, organize, and express what we know. So the design options for this are interaction, expression and communication, and strategy development. So with interaction, we can vary and honor the methods for response, navigation, and movement, optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. So especially in today's day and age, technology is everywhere. And I know most students that I come in contact with, they would much prefer do something on the internet than rather look at their physical textbook. So interaction with this is really, for me at least in math, is finding some videos that maybe explain what the textbook's going through. Also, some of the textbooks have links to videos that they can watch. So that's usually really helpful for students, but there's also a million other ways that you can interact with math. The physical example of the deck of cards, there's a ton of different ways we can get students to interact with that and be the most comfortable for that particular student. The design options for expression and communication use multiple media for communication, multiple tools for construction, composition, and creativity, build fluencies with graduated support, and address any biases related to the mode of expression and communication. So the biggest thing here is just making sure that you're expressing or communicating the material in a way that's specific to that student. So a big overall principle of UDL is definitely student specific. So we're trying to take away that aspect of like the one size fits all model and make it where we meet the student's needs. So making sure that, if we're giving a student something that's written in a textbook, that's the way that they prefer to see it. They don't want to see it in a different way. So really just engaging students with different modes of the same thing so that they can find what interests them or what they feel most comfortable with to learn the material. And then design options for strategy development, set meaningful goals, anticipate and plan for challenges, organize information and resources, enhance capacity for monitoring progress. So this is really about monitoring students' progress, which I always like to have the students be in on what they want their goals to be. So if I have a tutoring session and I'm going over something, we always set a goal for what they're going to have done the next session. And this really helps students, number one, stay engaged because they know they have to meet that goal by the next tutoring session, but also they understand that, okay, I need to plan a set amount of time so that if I do run into a problem, I can come ask a question and then still be able to meet my goal. So really these three principles all are really focused on meeting the student where they're at, engaging them, representing the material how they want, and then really showing that they understand the material through action and expression. Some examples of these UDL actions and expression strategies allow students to explain concepts in different ways. So writing, speaking, drawing, or demonstrating. So in math, again, when you ask students, most of the time they'll just say, yes, I understand. So finding ways that they can actually show you that they understand. Sometimes I have the student work a problem on the whiteboard and I'll work it on a piece of paper and we'll compare answers. And we'll see where that student went wrong, or if they did it right, then fantastic. Or maybe they'll come up with a question that they want to work on to show that they can relate that material and create a question that they can then work through. Use technology tools like speech to text for students who struggle with writing. So this kind of goes back to that where the UDL was built off of. Oops, I really hit the next slide. So like closed captions for students who struggle with listening to something they want to read it. This is another helpful tool for UDL. Provide scaffolding and step-by-step guidance to support executive function, and offer self-reflection and feedback opportunities to improve learning. So again, really staying focused on the student and making sure that they feel like they're meeting their goals, but also making sure that they understand the material at the same time. So a tutoring example that I came up with, a math tutor has a student explain a concept by presenting their own example and have the tutor solve it so that the student and tutor can compare. This is the biggest way, at least, that I've come up with in math to make sure that students are understanding the material that I present. And sometimes they get it right perfect, sometimes they don't. And then we kind of go back and rework and see where did they go wrong, how did they go wrong. And the important step in that is allowing the student to maybe check where they went wrong. So I always like to ask, well, what happened from step 2 to step 3? And that will really get the student interested in or more engaged with the material so that they're looking and saying, okay, maybe I missed a minus sign here or something went wrong in this step. So this is definitely a good example of the action and expression principle of UDL.
Okay, so we want you to think about a time when you or someone you know struggled to learn something, not because you weren't trying, but because the way the information presented to you just didn't work for you. As someone that has had a ton of math classes, I've felt really dumb a lot of times. Sitting in class when everyone around me gets it and I'm struggling over here. So think about that. Like, what made the learning difficult? What could have helped make it easier? So, one of the things that I stand out always, I think about this one class in grad school where, like I said earlier, one of my teachers always just read the book to us, and that never could help me. It never would help me because I could go home and read the book, but I'm like, I need more help than this. Um, what specific barriers made learning a challenge? There's all kinds of things like that could go on. You have to remember, like, not everything in the classroom is what's making learning a challenge. There's also lots of things coming from outside the classroom too. How did you or the person try to overcome those barriers? And then can you think of situations where information was presented in multiple ways that helped you understand it better? So one of the things that Chelsey and I talked about, with the UDL is how this can apply outside, and she'll talk more about this in a few minutes, outside of just the classroom. There's a lot of things that are going on in this world that I don't know how many people watch YouTube videos to try to learn how to do something. So, one of the things she and I talked about, and I can laugh about it now, but in the time I could not laugh about, was a few years ago, not too long after I moved to Louisiana, we had an ice storm and we had rolling blackouts kind of, and it blew my brand new water heater out. And so when I called, they said, "Oh, we'll replace the thermostats because all the parts are under warranty, but you have to call someone to replace it." So I called a plumber and did all this, and it was going to cost me $300. And the plumber said, "I'm really busy. It's going to be a few days, but it's really not that hard. Just YouTube it." And he goes, "If you can't figure it out, I'm more than happy to do it." And I'm like, "Okay, well, for $300, if it's not that hard, I can do it." And so YouTube the video, the longest video on how to change these was about a minute and a half. And so I was like, okay, a minute and a half, I can do this. And so I watched this video about 100 times and I tried and tried and tried. And the one thing they all kept saying was, do not break this clip. If you break this clip, your whole thing is trash. And it was so frustrating to me because I could not get it. And mine had two thermostats. And so eventually, I figured it out and I figured out the little trick. And all I needed in that 1.5 minute video was 10 more seconds of this is the little trick you need to know. And once I figured it out, so the first one took me about 2.5 hours and a lot of cussing and crying, to say the least. And then the second one took me about 10 seconds to do it. So it really wasn't that hard. It was just something I had never done, I had never seen. I'm watching a video, I'm watching someone do it, but I just needed a little more help. So sometimes that we have to remember that we need to do that. So that happens a lot in the classroom too. We have to remember there are times that our students just need a little more help. And just because it makes so much sense to you on your path that it's not necessarily the way that it's going to work for them, just give them a little more information, because all I needed was that information presented just a little bit different and I had it. So think about that, especially whenever you're trying to teach and do something. Think about what could be difficult, how that made you feel, and then think about your student that you're doing that for. Okay. Chelsey.
Yeah, and one thing I actually want to add to this, a lot of the times in tutoring, I get the question like, oh, I bet you never struggled with math, or I bet you never struggled with this. And so I always bring up something that I did struggle with in math, or if a student asks me, like if I'm in a calc class and I'm tutoring that, oh, I bet you never struggled with this. And I'm like, actually, you're wrong. I did struggle with this. So I was in your shoes at one point. But now obviously I've taken more math classes and I've learned different techniques and different things like that. But I always try to tell them, like everybody makes mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. That's what tutoring's for, is to make mistakes. And then we work together through that to get over those difficult things that may be challenging them. So I always ask students, if I present something that doesn't make sense, let me know, because we can find another option. We can find another way to learn this material that will make sense to that student. So that's something that I always think about, because multiple times I get asked, oh, I bet you never struggled with this. And in reality, I have struggled with it. And I think letting students know that, oh, even my tutor struggles with math, really lets them open up, and then they become more comfortable and they're like, okay, well, I can make this mistake, but I'm going to get through it. So that's a big thing with tutoring, is, or even teaching, just letting students know that it's okay to make mistakes and that we will overcome it one way or another.
To that, Chelsey, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I didn't talk over you, but to add to that, since you were talking about mistakes,
Yeah.
I encourage people to make mistakes in mine, because a lot of times that's where the struggle is. A lot of my students are too scared to make a mistake because they don't want to look like they don't know it. And as she was saying, like, that's why you're in tutoring and that's why you're here. And even in the classroom, I'm like, it's okay to make a mistake. Like, we're not all perfect. And if you make a mistake, that actually helps me to teach you better, because then I know where you're struggling, because I can see where your mistake is coming from and I can help you fix it. And that's part of what UDL is about.
Right.
Okay. Sorry, Chelsey.
No, you're good. That was a perfect point. So why UDL matters in tutoring? It promotes equity and inclusion. It ensures that all students, including those with disabilities, language barriers, or different learning preferences, have equal opportunities to succeed. So the whole goal of UDL is to break away from that mode of just, here's the information and everybody has to learn it that way. And it's really to meet students where they're at, what they need, and giving them those resources they need to learn that material. It enhances student engagement, making learning flexible and relevant. It increases motivation. So when students are met where they're at, and they're given multiple different resources to look at one topic, they usually can find something that makes sense to them or something that they're interested in. And so that's definitely going to increase their motivation, and just really having learning be flexible in a sense that we present it in multiple different ways. It helps any student, whether they have learning disabilities or language barriers or not. It encourages independence and confidence. So UDL strategies help students develop self-regulation and problem-solving skills. The next slide is all about UDL outside the classroom, but really this setup allows students to know that, okay, if I don't get something, I can always look at other resources, or I can always go to different things and try to figure it out. So those skills that they learn in tutoring, when we're applying UDL principles, they can use in other aspects of their life and in other classes. And it prepares students for real-world learning. So UDL encourages adaptable lifelong learning habits that are useful beyond school. So kind of like I said, the idea that we present things in one way and everybody should understand it definitely doesn't work, because everybody has different learning styles. So if we can meet those students where their learning styles are, whether that be maybe visual, or they prefer to hear things, or they prefer to write everything down, they're going to use those strategies in other aspects of their life, and it's going to help them beyond just school. So UDL outside the classroom, the whole goal of this, which I think I've said multiple times throughout this presentation, is to break that one-size-fits-all model and create a model that's accessible for all. So the goal is to not necessarily just focus on students who may have those learning disabilities and everything, but this is a method that works for everybody. Meeting students where they are, whether that be they need that extra support or they just need to see it in a different way. UDL allows for that. Students can take these strategies of UDL and apply it in their everyday life. So this is any strategies that they learn when they're, maybe learning a particular math concept and they had to look through 3 different sources before they could figure it out. They're going to apply that to other things when they run into a difficulty, maybe in a different class, or fixing their water heater potentially. So UDL has actually been applied in workforce training by taking into account the diversity of the workforce. So when we looked into some outside places where UDL has been applied, this was mainly one of the ones that came up the most. So workforce training, by training employees, normally you just get, you're all in one place and you're given the same set of instructions, and that's how it goes. But people have now been using different resources, presenting things in different ways to train workforce or to implement a new protocol or something along those lines. And it has been shown to be successful because you're meeting people where they are. Not everybody thinks the same way. Not everybody has the same thoughts about a particular topic. So if we can show things in different ways, more people are going to engage with that content and actually be able to apply it. And really the focus of this presentation is that UDL can be applied anywhere, and it should really just focus on giving everyone the support they need. So meeting them where they're at and taking into account the difference between students and people in everyday life. All right. Final takeaways for this. Again, UDL is not just for students with disabilities, it benefits everybody. So that kind of goes back to where this started, ramps, of course, are helpful for people with disabilities, but also people who push strollers. So the idea of this is it's going to help everybody, no matter how it's implemented. Small changes in tutoring sessions can make learning more engaging and accessible. So I know, we have 50 minutes with each student. You can't implement every single UDL technique in that time frame, but you can start by really engaging students and trying to get them more engaged with the content by presenting things in different ways. Or the next time, that I run into a student who maybe doesn't understand what we were talking about the first time, that allows me to think, okay, how can I present this differently so that I can meet them where they're at. And again, tutors don't need to use every UDL strategy at once. So maybe starting with one or two simple techniques and building from there will be the best way to start. So yeah, really just the main takeaway from this is meeting every student where they're at so that we can ensure that everybody gets that equal access to education. And that is it for our presentation. So thank you. Any questions?
Do you want to put the references?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
It kind of delayed on this end.
That's okay. It's kind of a weird. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, let us know.
Would you be open to requests for your presentation slides?
I don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind either.
Is that a
You also have access to the full presentation. You can send any requests for the slides directly to me at dkemp2@lsu.edu.
Thank you.
Absolutely.